All right, this is Shayla with Whole Motherhood, and you are listening to Moms Learning with Moms. And right here, I have Jackie with me. She is a friend from high school. We sang in a couple of choirs together. Um, and then she moved on to singing with the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. I wish we could just have her sing for you during this whole thing because she just could lull everybody to paradise or wherever we're going. I don't know. Anyway, but
Why don't you sing, Shayla? That's what
yeah,
we
we could
all
do a
want to
little.
hear.
We're gonna do a little duet here for you. She is going to talk about her Down syndrome son, her journey with him, and the challenges of having a Down syndrome child, and the blessings, and all the adventure that goes with it.
I am going to start out, and I hope you don't feel like I'm calling you out because that's not my intention. This is mainly to educate. So I just want to let you know that first off, the correct way to say it is not Down syndrome child or Down syndrome son, but to use people first language. This is something that actually a lot of parents feel really passionately about. So it's more appropriate to say something to the effect of your son with Down syndrome or the child with Down syndrome, because they're a person first. And so, for example, if you have a child that's broken their leg, someone's not going to come up and say your broken leg kid. They're going to say your son with a broken leg. And so, because it doesn't define who they are, it's not who they are, it's just something that is part of them. Just so you're educated on that, people first language is actually really important to parents that have children with Down syndrome.
I love that. Thank you.
So, I don't know, where do you want me to start?
Let's start at the beginning. When you found out you were having a baby with Down syndrome.
There you go. I actually didn't know I was having a child with Down syndrome. My pregnancy was pretty much normal. The only thing that wasn't like quite right, like my other pregnancies, was I didn't feel him moving much. And they just told me that was probably because my placenta was in the front. And so they said, sometimes you just won't feel it, much when that's the case. But now I know it's because people with Down syndrome have low muscle tone. And so I probably couldn't feel him moving much because, he probably couldn't move as much or as strongly as other babies could. But other than that, I had no signs or knowledge or anything that he had Down syndrome until after he was born. And I just remember when he was first born, I just was looking at him and was like, he looks a little different than our other kids. And I had no idea, but I knew something just looked a little different. And when he was born, he was only 4 pounds, 15 ounces. So he's quite small, and he was a little early, but anyway, about 15 minutes after he was born, I realized that he had Down syndrome, and I just blurted it out. And the nurse was like, yeah, we're pretty sure that he does. And so they showed me a couple of things that were markers. So of course, there are different physical features like in their face and things that you can see. But there are a couple of other things that I found really interesting. If you look at the palm of your hand, the lines, I don't know how I'm going to do this with my phone, but see, there's like lines that go across your palm and they don't connect.
Right.
Can you see that?
Yeah, you can.
There's something called a simian crease with kids with Down syndrome or people with Down syndrome. And it's not always, but a lot of the time, those lines will just be one straight line that goes all the way across their palm. It's called a simian crease. And that is a sign of Down syndrome. And then another thing is a lot of times they'll have a wide gap between their big toe on their foot and the second toe next to it. So it's kind of like a little V between those two toes. And I had no idea about those things. So those are kind of some signs. And for those that may not know, Down syndrome is 3 copies of the 21st chromosome. So everybody has 2 copies of every chromosome in their body, but of the 21st chromosome, those with Down syndrome have 3 copies instead of 2. So it's actually called trisomy 21, meaning 3 copies of the 21st chromosome. So that is what Down syndrome is.
Wow.
So,
Wow. So have you learned all this as you, I mean, how much information and education did they actually give you in the hospital, or have you self-learned?
well, I had worked with kids with disabilities like in high school and then again in college. I had done best buddies and things like that. And so I was familiar with people with disabilities, but like I really didn't have knowledge about, what it was. I just been, hanging out with people, but I didn't really know anything, right? And so once I was in the hospital, the doctor actually came in that evening and talked to my husband and I for about 3 hours
Mm,
and gave us different information about the health things that he could face, because there are so many different health challenges that can come with Down syndrome that I just had no idea about. And then we got books and read about books. And then, I mean, so many doctor appointments over the years, and we've gone to conferences to try to learn different things, and then just personal experience. So yeah, just a lot of learning along the way that I just had no idea before.
as a baby, how was he different?
So I already mentioned that kids with Down syndrome have low muscle tone. So he was really, they call it like floppy, like he couldn't like lift his arm as easily as another baby, things like that. He just felt really like floppy in my arms. Um, and the only other thing that I can say, other than, I mean, he was in the NICU for 3 weeks. And so he had a feeding tube and oxygen and all of those types of things, because of the low muscle tone, he couldn't latch, and they had to try to teach him how to eat. And so we ended up having to bottle feed him because he wasn't getting enough nourishment trying to breastfeed, because he just didn't have the strength to try to do it. And I tried really hard to breastfeed him because that was important to me. But finally, a doctor came in and talked to me and just said, you need to let that go, because what is best for him is to have formula. And that was really not life changing for me, but it gave me such a different perspective that you're right. Like, I just have to do what's best for my son. And if this is what is best for him, that's what I have to do, because he needs to grow and thrive. Right. And so that was really eye opening for me. And I was grateful for that experience. But the only other thing that I noticed outside of like his health challenges was that he really, really loved people. Like, he would just stare in my eyes for hours, and he loved faces and looking at people. And if we would like put a toy in front of him, he couldn't have cared less. Like, he just wanted to look at faces and people. And my other kids were not like that. It was markedly different than my other children. I thought it was really, really interesting and very sweet. And even still, like, he's very in tune with people's emotions. Um, he does not like it when people cry or are upset. Um, and he even went to speech therapy a couple of weeks ago, and his speech therapist was doing some testing with him and showed him a bunch of different pictures, asking him questions. And one of the pictures was of babies crying. And she just said, give me another word for sad. And he just sat and stared at the picture.
Oh,
And at first I was like, oh, he's trying to think of another word for sad. And then I realized, no, he was upset because the babies were crying. And he finally was like, sad, okay. Like, he was really worried about the babies. So he's just very tender, and is very in tune with people's feelings, which I think is really special.
did your older boys have a lot of understanding about what was happening, what was different about him?
So my kids were really little when he was born. My oldest was 6, and so we had 4 children under 6. They were all very young. And so when we talked to them, we approached it in the way that we just told them, you know, he has something called Down syndrome. And that just means that he's going to learn how to do things a little slower. So it's going to take him a longer time to learn how to walk. It's going to take him a longer time to know. how to talk and things like that. And we just talked about how each of us has something different about us that's unique. So for example, my husband has this weird little hook toe on his foot, and so he pulled off his sock and said, "Look at my hook toe. I'm still your dad, but I've always had this little funky toe, you know." And so it doesn't make him any different than anyone else, other than he just has this unique toe. And I have vitiligo. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a skin condition where I'm losing the pigmentation
Oh,
in my
wow.
skin.
Right.
And that didn't happen until I was in my late 20s. And it's not contagious or anything like that. But, I'm able to talk to my kids about the fact that I'm still your mom. It doesn't make me any different that my skin looks different than yours, but we just pointed out different things that we're each unique, and we pointed out unique things about each of them, and then just said, this is something unique that your brother was born with. It's called Down syndrome, and this is what's going to be the situation. And so they handled that really well, and I think they really understood that. And then Blake came home, and I think the hardest thing for them was seeing me gone for 3 weeks in the hospital with him in the NICU. That was challenging.
Hmm.
And then for him to come home on oxygen, I think that was a little difficult for them to see him that way. But other than that, like, they have been so loving and so helpful. And he's just their brother, just like any of their other brothers. He's just their brother, and that's all they've ever known. And so, yeah, there are challenges that come and things that they have to deal with that they probably wouldn't if he didn't have Down syndrome. But I think they're better for it, and I think they would say the same thing.
So as Blake has grown, what has been like the milestones for him in socially and educationally? What are some things that you guys work on with him?
Oh, so many things.
I'll bet.
Where do I start, Shayla? Well, when he was first born, we did something called early intervention, where they have someone come and work with us until he's 3 years old. And so they sent out speech therapy and physical therapy and occupational therapy, and we were working with him since he was about a month old on those things. So he's had therapy basically his entire life. And so we would do those types of things, and they would work on, trying to build up his muscle strength, because I talked about his low muscle tone. But that low muscle tone also affects lots of different things. It doesn't just affect, your arms and your hands and your feet. It affects the muscles in your face. And so you may see a lot of times some people with Down syndrome who have their tongue out like this. And it's because they don't have tone in their tongue.
Hmm.
And so that's why a lot of times it's difficult to understand what they're saying, is because their tongue is getting in the way, because their muscles aren't strengthened in their mouth. Does that make sense? And
Wow.
so that also affects eating. And so we would have an occupational therapist that would work on feeding therapy with us to teach him, with a normal child, or a typical child, I should say, you would give them a piece of food and they would just eat it, right? But I would have to teach him how to move it to the back of his mouth with his tongue. I had to teach him how to actually eat. And so it's just things that you wouldn't ever think you would have to teach someone, because it's things that just come naturally to most of us, right? But I learned a lot through those things. We had to teach him lots of different things to prepare him how to sit up, to prepare how to crawl, and eventually to walk. He didn't walk until he was about 2 years old, and that's pretty typical for kids with Down syndrome. And we still struggle with feeding. I still have to help with his eating sometimes. Most of that's behavioral. But the other thing I want to say is every person with Down syndrome is so different and so unique. And so I don't want to speak for the entire Down syndrome community, because I can't. And that's not fair, because every person with Down syndrome is so different. So I can really only speak for my son and our experience. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize is that there is such a broad range of disability within the Down syndrome community. There, another thing, I would ask this woman that would come in for our early intervention, and I would ask her when he was a baby, how high functioning is he going to be? And she would just say that I can't answer that. And that was really unsatisfying to me at the time. I didn't realize why she couldn't answer that question. And over time, I've started to realize, even though she told me, I started to really see, oh, this is why she couldn't answer the question. Because we even said, well, what is normal for kids with Down syndrome? And she'd say, normal is a washing machine cycle.
Oh,
We really liked that. And I think it's really important to know there is no normal. I had a friend, she had 2 kids with Down syndrome, and one really struggled with fine motor skills, but was really excelling at gross motor skills. And then her other child was the complete opposite.
hmm.
And so even 2 kids with Down syndrome from the exact same parents had different things that were easier or more difficult for them. And some people with Down syndrome have significant health issues. It's very common to have heart conditions, some more severe than others. With Down syndrome, there are a lot of gastrointestinal issues. A lot of them, when they're born, have surgeries for things like this, or will have feeding tubes, some their whole life. And that friend that I talked about that had 2 children with Down syndrome, one of them actually passed away a few years ago from leukemia, because people with Down syndrome have a higher increased chance of getting leukemia. So there are a lot of different health conditions. Thyroid conditions are quite common. Sleep apnea is really common. My son has been on a CPAP for many years at night. So there are just a lot of different things that can be issues that you have to work with Down syndrome, and it just varies. Every person is so different. And some are nonverbal their entire lives, and others are able to go to college. So it's so different. And another interesting thing that I found was I went to an event for people with Down syndrome and their parents, to try to help socialize my son. And this was several years ago, but I remember one of the moms was there, and she was bragging about how her daughter was potty trained by the time she was 18 months, and was just saying, anybody could do it. And that was really hurtful, because that is an exception. That is not something that is very common. My son was not potty trained until he was 5, and even still he's not fully potty trained. And so if you have a child with a disability, I would just say, do not compare your child to anyone else. And that's really, really hard not to do that, because as our children age, the gap between them and their typical peers really becomes wider. So like I said, when he was a baby, I didn't really see too many differences. But now that he is in his later years in elementary school, the gap is so wide. It is so much different. And so it's something that is very difficult to not compare as a parent, to say, well, if my son didn't have Down syndrome, this is where he would be. He would be hanging out with these other children or doing these other things. But I've had to train myself not to do that. And then in addition, not to compare him to other kids with disabilities as well, because the disabilities are so different. You really just have to learn not to do that, because all it does is cause pain. So you just have to take your child for who they are and love them for who they are and help them grow where they're at and focus on that.
Which is the trial of parenting in any child, is to not compare. And I
Isn't that
love
true?
that. I love that. How does he do in school?
He loves school. My son is like so social to a fault, but he loves going to school. He is in a contained classroom with other kids with special needs, which That's controversial in the special needs community. That's something where a lot of parents, feel strongly that you should be integrating them in a typical classroom, and I think that has its place, definitely. And that was what I wanted to do for my son originally, but I had to again look at what his needs were and where he was at. And my son specifically has really delayed receptive language, which means that he struggles to understand what I'm saying with speech. That is not the case for the majority of people with Down syndrome. I would say the majority, their receptive language is actually really good and they can understand what you're saying, but they just can't repeat it back. And so it's their language that they struggle with. But my son struggles with both. And so he cannot sit in a typical classroom when they're doing math and all of these English projects and things like this and be expected to do the work that they're doing. He's just not on that same level. And also he would get bored and would lash out. And so it's actually been really good for him to be in the classroom that he's in, because they can give him one-on-one attention, take him where he's at, and help him learn at the level he's at. And it's actually been really, really good for him. And he loves it. And yeah, he loves school.
I love that. I love that. So what are some things that actually let's talk about your individual son. What is his personality like? What are some things your family just loves about him?
Oh, he's hilarious. He's just got like the biggest personality in the whole world. Like he's just fun in a little ball of energy. Like he is the biggest tease. Even when he was really little and the therapist would come and work on puzzles with him, like he would put the colors in the wrong place and would get a little gleam in his eye and be like, do you recognize that I'm putting this in the wrong spot on purpose? Like, such a tease. And he's so fun. Like we went on a family trip last week to the Grand Canyon, and we were going on a hike, and my husband brought our hiking poles with us, and my son took one and he was like, I'm Granny, and pretended it was his cane. And everywhere we went on that hike, every person that we would pass, he would look at him and say, hi, I'm Granny. He makes everyone happy wherever he goes. We even went on a trip with my dad a few years ago, right before the pandemic hit. And we were standing in line for dinner. And my son, bless his heart, he has no stranger danger or understanding of like, these are people you don't know, because everyone is his friend. Like everyone is, which is so wonderful, but it's also pretty dangerous. But anyway, here we were in line, and there was a lady in a wheelchair, and my son just ran right up to her and he touched her on the shoulder and said, Tag, you're it. And she was so quick and just touched him right back and said, Tag back. But it seems, which I thought was adorable that she did that. But it's things like that where he just really brings light and happiness wherever he goes and makes everyone smile wherever he goes. I mean, he's a joy in our family. And that's really all I can say. He just brings joy and smiles and laughter all the time to our family.
So do you know what you can expect in the future, really, or not really?
Not really. Like it's funny because my son specifically, and I've heard this is common with kids with special needs, but he'll go through stages where he'll make a lot of growth, and then he'll plateau and sometimes even decline a little bit. And then he'll have another period of extreme growth, and then the same thing will happen where he'll plateau and kind of decline a bit sometimes. And so I never really know. I know when he was about 5 years old and he was about to go into elementary school, he still could not say mom. And I was like, he's never going to speak. He's never going to know my name. And then we started, he'd been doing speech therapy for years at that point. And And then he even, like, I took him to a new speech therapist, and then all of a sudden it just kind of clicked. And she got him to the point where she could help him to say, I want, and then tell me the thing that he wants. And that was huge to get him from not only not saying mom, but to getting to the point where he could say 3 words together to express to me what he wants.
Wow.
And so I have just continued to see growth in so many ways. And even just a few months ago, um, he's an escape artist. And so, and the thing is he's tricky. He's smart. Like I told you, he like with those puzzles, like he knows
Yeah.
what he's doing. So he'll wait until I'm in the bathroom, and then he'll be like, now's my chance. And he'll escape the house and he'll run down the sidewalk. And then I'll come out and be like, oh no, he's gone. And so then I'll have to run down the sidewalk and try to get him. But again, he just doesn't understand
Wow.
danger and boundaries and things like that. He just knows he wants freedom and to have fun. And he's been known to walk into neighbors' houses. And so it can be quite dangerous. He's just made a lot of progress. Like even just a few months ago, he was running away, and I had to haul my huge child home. But we just went on this trip a couple or just this last week, and he stayed in our campground the whole time and didn't run away. And I just feel like just in the past couple of months, even he's just made a lot of progress with his maturity and understanding, and even his communication. I think a part of that is we put him in a special needs hip hop class, and he has another little friend with Down syndrome in that class. And something that is hard with kids with Down syndrome and for me personally is finding where he fits socially. So I go to church and he doesn't fit, and that's really hurtful, because there's no place for him. He just doesn't fit. And again, at school, we have to try where does he fit? We go on a field trip, and he's not invited to be with the other kids in their group. He just hangs out with me because he's not capable of doing the things that they are. So there are very hurtful things that happen because they just don't fit. And so finally I have a friend that has that other little boy with Down syndrome who asked if we wanted to do that hip hop class. And we said, that sounds really fun. I think that my son would love that. And he has loved it. So it's just been really good for him to have this hip hop class where he feels like he's included. He can do what they ask, like his freedom, right? And then I finally was like, I should invite this other little boy to our house because my son had never had a play date in his entire life. And so we invited this other little boy to come to our house, and he's come over twice now. And it's been so fulfilling to see him have a friend. And I realized I was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And I think it is important for him to have people that he's around and friends that he's associated with that are typical peers, because they learn from each other, right? And I do think that is important. But also, I think it was important for him to have a friend that was on his same level, that understood where he was coming from, that wanted to do the same types of things that he wanted to do, play with the same type of toys that he wants to play with. I mean, it was just so thrilling to see them having so much fun together. And anyway, I learned a lot just in the last couple of months from that experience, and realizing, okay, I just have to keep him in his lane. And again, focus on where he's at instead of what my desires are for him of having friends in the neighborhood or whatever. And let that go and just focus on the things that he needs. So
How old is your son?
he's 10.
Fun. With the people with Down syndrome, they are so engaging and they love people. How do you want others to respond? Do you have a thought on how you would like people to respond to your son?
So it's interesting, when he was first born, I remember going to the grocery store with him the first time. And my husband and I just got in the car and we're like, everyone was staring at us. And it was so unnerving because we felt like we were like the center of attention. And we were like, we didn't ask for this. Like, we don't want to be stared at our whole lives. But over time, we realized people aren't staring because we're this show. They're staring because they're intrigued, or they think he's cute, or they're just trying to process it, right? And so that isn't offensive to us. It's just something that is a part of our life that we're used to now, that, people will look. But I honestly think it's because he's so engaging and so fun. He makes people happy, And so I'm grateful for that. I would much prefer someone come up and engage with him and talk with him like they would any other child, than to pretend like he doesn't have a disability and ignore us. And so even if you have a question about Down syndrome that you're nervous to ask or something because you don't want to be offensive, I would much rather have you ask me a question, even if you think it might be offensive, so that I can answer it for you, than to be worried about hurting my feelings. I live this every day. This is our life, right? And so you asking a question is not going to bring up something that is going to hurt me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I live it. And so and I feel like it's part of my responsibility of being his mother to help educate too, and to help other people to understand him. And also, I think one of the biggest things I've learned through being his mother is how to advocate for him, and realizing that if I don't advocate for him, no one's going to. And so that's something that has been a huge growing experience for me, because I'm the type of person that doesn't like conflict. And a lot of times I just kind of let things go. And there was one time he was hospitalized for a week in the hospital. That's happened several times. And and his doctor had specifically told me that he shouldn't have a specific medication. And some other doctors came in and said, oh no, we're going to give that to him, it's fine. And I was like, well, his doctor said he shouldn't have it. And anyway, there was this whole rigmarole amongst the nurses and the doctors, and they brought in all these people trying to decide what they were going to give him. And they finally ended up giving him a different medication, but it was an even more hardcore medication than the one that's I was told he shouldn't have. And I was really nervous and didn't feel like he should have it. But at that point, the doctors had been so adamant that he should have this medication, that I finally just like relented and was like, okay, go ahead. And then that next morning, he couldn't even lift his head up because he was so out of it. And I realized in that moment, I'm the one that knows his medical history. I'm the one that knows all the ins and outs of his entire life. And these doctors see a little snippet of what I'm telling them, but I am the only one that knows all of it. And so I have to advocate for him. And if I really feel like he shouldn't have a medication, then I have to speak up and say no. And so that was a huge learning experience for me. And the same goes with his education. We have what's called IEP meetings. They're individual education plans, and they're legal binding documents. And you have to do these IEP meetings with the school every year to reevaluate goals, and they put different minutes of services they get in there, and different things like that. And I've learned I'm the one that has to keep track of all of his paperwork, all of his previous IEPs, all of his doctor paperwork. I have these huge binders filled with all of his paperwork, because no one has the whole story but me, right? And so it's been so helpful to be able to take those binders to those IEP meetings and to open them up and say, well, wait, he was getting this many hours and now you're adjusting it to this many hours. Tell me why this is happening. And so I've really learned how to be his advocate. I'm still learning.
Wow.
But that's been something that's been really helping me grow as a person, I think.
Wow. And that's yearly that you have those meetings?
Uh-huh.
Wow. And is that for this, that must be for the school education system.
Yeah, that is for the school education system. And it's really interesting. I don't think a lot of people realize all of the paperwork that is involved with having a child with special needs. I mean, there's just so much so much legally that you have to be careful about. For example, um, if I have a grandparent or a parent that passes away, it's actually important to let them know not to put my son in their will. Because if they inherit money to my son and then he has money to his name, then when he is older and he needs to have funding to help himself live when he's older, they're going to say, well, you have access to this money. You don't financially qualify, and then he won't get any services.
Wow.
And so there are actually a lot of things you have to be really careful about. Um, and then there's even things, I have a friend at the moment who her son just turned 18 and she has to go to a court and stand before a court and convince them why she should have to be his guardian and have his legal rights in her control because he can't take care of himself, but she has to go to court to file for that. So there are a lot of different things that parents of kids with special needs have to do that I don't think a lot of people know that are really stressful
Hmm.
and really hard.
I guess that kind of comes to one of my other questions. Do you have more advice for people who have children with Down syndrome or maybe just children with special needs? Is there advice you would for sure give them?
Um, I think I touched on it a little bit already, but just, with the not comparing, but also like when he was first born and I found out that he had Down syndrome, my whole life before that moment, it was really weird. It was like a movie. Like my whole life flashed before my eyes and I saw like every little thing that had happened up until that moment. And then all of a sudden, the whole future that I had for my life, like I had my whole future planned out of this is, my husband and I are going to do this together and this is what this is going to look like and I had three older boys and I thought, two older ones will be best friends and then my third one will be best friends with this son, like I had all these plans. And then all of a sudden, my whole future was just wiped clean. And all of a sudden, I just saw erased. And it was just this moment of wow. And it was a moment of loss. And I want parents of kids with special needs to know that it's okay to grieve that loss. And I had to go through a grieving process. And I think that's okay. And it doesn't mean that I don't love my son because I love him more than anyone could ever know. He's so special to me. But I still had to grieve the loss of the things that I wanted for his life. And that was really hard for me. And for a long time, I focused on, well, he's never going to do this and he's never going to do that. And, he's probably never going to get married and things like that. And I was talking with the lady that would come in for early intervention. She also has a son with Down syndrome, and she just told me, Jackie, you cannot focus on what may or may not happen in the future. Just focus on him now and love him now for who he is. And so I have tried really hard to just focus on today. And I can't worry about 40 years down the road if I pass away and if my kids are going to have to take care of him or what's going to happen down the line. I can't worry about those things. I can only focus on today and giving him love and helping him grow in the best ways that I can now. And I think that was probably the best advice that she could have ever given me was just love him and take it one day at a time. And some days are going to be really hard, really, really hard. But some days are going to be just fine. And in the long run, like I look back and I just think we made it through that, like that was really hard and we made it through and look where he is now. And now he has a friend. And like a year ago, I would have never imagined that my son would have a friend. And today he has a friend, and so that makes me think in the future, I don't know what's going to happen. And so I just have to focus on today. And I think that's really hard to do, but I think it's really important. to do. So that's the advice that I would give, is just love, try to focus on the positive, do the best you can. Also, let the little things go. Like, you're never going to be perfect. Sometimes you're going to have a really horrible day. Don't let it define you. Like, just move forward from it, and just keep plugging on, right?
I love that.
And I think it's been really beneficial for our family, especially my kids, to see the struggle. And I think that gives them compassion for
Mm,
other children that maybe don't even have special needs, but like, everybody struggles, right? Everybody has something that they're dealing with. And I think, for me too, it gives me more compassion for other people, and to give them a little more grace, and to say, you know what, they were really mean, but maybe they're just having a horrible day, or they're just really going through something, and just give people a little grace, because we're all struggling with something, right?
right.
Well, they learn how to be nurturers, right? Like, my kids have had to help more with their brother than they would if he didn't have special needs. And so they've learned how, like, for example, one time we had an adult come over to babysit so that my husband and I could go on a date. And the whole time, my oldest son was the one that was like, Blake's about to hang over the banister. Like, he was the one watching the whole time, because he knew what to look for. And then when my son wouldn't eat, he would be like, well, let me come over. And he was the one that got him to eat dinner, because he knew his quirks. He knew the things that he needed to help. And so, and he knew how to get his CPAP on him at night. And, so my children have learned how to help because they've had to. And so I think they really learn how to be caretakers and how to give compassion because they have to, you know? And that's another thing. A lot of people will say, well, how do you do it? I don't know how you do it. And it's like, well, I didn't really have another choice, like, this is what was handed to me, and I'll do it because I have to. And I think that's what a lot of people experience. If you lose the loss of a spouse or something, you just move forward because you have to. And so a lot of us deal with things in our lives that are hard, and maybe we wouldn't have chosen them, or maybe we would have, but we just move forward because we're handed what we're handed, and you just do it because you have to.
It's interesting the strength I see just from what you said, that it is hard, but you're doing the best you can and actually growing and thriving because of it. I think your
Well,
son's pretty lucky to have you.
thanks. I'm pretty lucky to have him, is really the case. He's making me a different person than I was, which I'm grateful for. So,
I love it. We're going to close off and say goodbye and remind everyone to just keep learning.